Welcome to my channel. If you like it, leave a like and a comment. Enjoy watching. Smoke painted the sky in shades of orange and gray as the city of Verelion crumbled around him. Zalvin, for had once been a jewel among the stars, a paradise of towering crystalline spires and gravity-defying gardens. Now, it was a war zone. Jake Arlen sprinted through the wreckage, his boots crunching over glass and fragments of alien metal. He had no reason to be there. His ship had crashed during a routine smuggling run, and he'd barely escaped the wreckage with his rifle and a cracked comm. He was bleeding, tired, and alone. Plasma bolts cracked overhead, searing holes into nearby columns. He ducked and rolled behind a fallen statue, breath ragged. The Zorvak Syndicate was here in full force, sweeping the capital clean. Civilians, soldiers, royalty. It didn't matter. Anything that moved was a target. He waited for the patrol to pass, heart pounding, and crept forward into the broken remains of what had once been a ceremonial plaza. The statue of some ancient ruler lay shattered, its severed head smoldering in the dust. That's when he heard it. A sound. Faint. A muffled cry. Jake's instincts screamed at him to ignore it. But something pulled him forward. He followed the sound to the edge of a collapsed tower. Rubble was piled high, but he caught a flicker of movement beneath a shattered column. Fingers. Pale, trembling fingers reaching for life. He rushed forward and dropped to his knees, clearing debris with desperate strength. "Hold on," he muttered. "I've got you." As he peeled back a steel support beam, the dust cleared just enough for him to see her face. She was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, not from makeup or tech, but from natural bioluminescence, glowing softly along veins that pulsed in rhythm with her slowing heartbeat. Her hair was silver with streaks of violet, matted with blood. Her eyes, wide and luminous, locked onto his. She tried to speak, but coughed instead, blood dribbling from her lips. "Easy now," he said, voice low. "You're hurt. I'm getting you out." Her voice was hoarse, alien, musical even through the pain. "You are human." "Yeah," Jake replied. "Surprise. You should not be here. Story of my life." He lifted the last heavy slab, pinning her down, and carefully pulled her out. She cried out in pain but gritted her teeth, refusing to show weakness. Jake slung her arm over his shoulder. She was light, almost weightless, but every movement brought her agony. They moved through the ruins like shadows. Sirens screamed in the distance, punctuated by more explosions. Twice they ducked into cover as syndicate drones passed overhead. Jake held her tightly, shielding her with his own body, his heart thundering against her side. Eventually, they reached the hollowed-out shell of an abandoned transport pod, tucked beneath the wreckage of a fallen bridge. It was small, dark, and cold, but it was shelter. He laid her down gently, wrapping her in his jacket. "Why?" she whispered. "Why save me?" Jake leaned back against the wall, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the shadows beyond. "Guess I'm just bad at walking away." She studied him, even through the haze of pain. Something shifted in her expression. Confusion. Curiosity. Maybe something more. "I am a Lyra of the Elendari," she murmured. "Daughter of Queen Zealand. Heir to the throne." Jake blinked, processing the weight of her words. "Well, princess," he said, exhaling slowly. "Looks like we're both in deep now." And outside, Zalvin, 4 burned on. The days after the rescue blurred into a feverish haze of silence, shallow breathing, and survival. Alira's injuries were worse than Jake had first thought. A fractured leg, internal bruising, cracked ribs, and something else. A subtle glow had begun to dim beneath her skin, as if her body was losing its energy source. Jake didn't understand Elendari biology, but he knew what fading looked like. He did what he could. Found scraps of rations from fallen supply drones. Boiled water over a jury-rigged plasma coil. Used torn fabric and salvaged medical foam to bind her wounds. When she shivered in her sleep, he pressed close, his warmth the only comfort in the cold, sunless ruin they were hiding in. She barely spoke at first, only groaning softly when the pain flared. But he heard her whisper his name once in her sleep, softly, like it meant something. He didn't respond. He just tightened his grip on his rifle and stared at the narrow slit in the wall where light barely reached. The world outside was still hunting her. And now they were hunting him too. On the fourth day, she woke fully. Jake was sharpening a stolen vibroblade when her voice, calm but cracked, broke the silence. "You stayed." He looked up. She was propped against the wall, her breathing labored but steady, the glow in her skin returning. Just barely. "Couldn't exactly leave a royal bleeding in the dirt," Jake said, trying to keep his tone light. "You could have. Many would have. Especially a human." He raised an eyebrow. "We've got a bad rep?" Her lips curled faintly. "You're known as reckless, unruly, driven by coin and chaos." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "That's fair. But not always true." She studied him, long lashes shadowing her violet eyes. "Why did you really help me?" Jake hesitated. He wanted to give her the easy answer. Something casual. Something that didn't make him feel exposed. But the silence between them had grown too heavy for lies. "You looked terrified. Trapped. And maybe. I've been there too." Elira's expression softened. "You're a soldier?" "No," Jake said. "Just a guy who's seen too much war." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension, once rigid and cautious, had shifted. He could feel it. So could she. That night, the temperature dropped dangerously low. Jake pulled her closer, wrapping the emergency blanket around them both. She didn't protest. "Your heart," she said suddenly, her fingers barely brushing his chest. "It beats so loudly." Jake chuckled. "Yours is quiet. Like a whisper." "It's slowing," she admitted. "The longer I'm away from the palace, from the source crystals, the more my body weakens." Jake's throat tightened. "There's gotta be something I can do." "There's one way to slow the decay," she whispered. "But it's intimate. It involves resonance." He blinked. "You're gonna have to explain that." "In my culture, when two beings stay in prolonged close contact, especially with physical connection, their energy fields begin to sync. If yours is strong enough, it could keep mine stable." Jake said nothing for a long second. Then he shifted, wrapping his arms around her, gently pulling her fully against his chest. "Start sinking, princess." She gasped softly, not from pain this time. Their bodies molded together, her cold skin seeking his heat. She laid her head over his heart, her breathing slowing, deeper. "Thank you," she murmured. Jake closed his eyes, arms tightening around her as the distant sound of warships rumbled above. "No more thanks. Just stay alive." That night, she didn't tremble in her sleep. That night, he held her like he already knew he wouldn't let her go. The ruins no longer felt like shelter. They were a tomb waiting to be sealed. Jake knew it the moment he intercepted the transmission through a hacked Syndicate scout drone, encoded, but not enough to stop his decrypted implant from catching every word. The message was clear. Elira was to be hunted, captured or killed. Preferably killed. The bounty was enormous. But what froze Jake's blood wasn't the sum, it was who had placed it. Elendari. Her own people. He stared at the projection hovering above the broken metal table. A holographic image of Elira rotated slowly, her title stripped, her name twisted into a political threat. The words "traitor to the throne" flashed in royal glyphs, tainted red. Jake shut it off with a vicious swipe. When he turned, Elira was already awake. She had been watching him in silence. "They've declared me dead," she said softly, voice taut with grief. "Now they call me a traitor to make it true." Jake didn't know what to say. He lowered himself beside her, the anger still simmering in his chest. "Who?" he finally asked. "Who gave the order?" "My mother's council," Elira whispered. "Those who smile in the day and poison the night. They betrayed the crown. Me. All of Elendari. The Zorvax offered them power in exchange for chaos." Jake let the words sink in, but all he could think of was how calm she sounded. Too calm. "You should rest," he said. "No," she replied. "I've rested enough. I need to fight. But first—" She pushed herself upright with difficulty, reaching into the lining of her cloak. From a hidden seam, she withdrew a small, glowing crystal carved into a spiral, a ceremonial shard etched with ancient runes. Jake watched as she sliced the tip of her finger on its edge. Her silver-blue blood glowed brightly in the darkness. "I bind this oath in blood," she said, her voice rising like a song, filled with power and pain. "By the breath of the stars, by the roots of the source, I claim protection not by title, but by choice." Before he could stop her, she reached for his hand. "Wait, what is this?" "You saved my life, Jake Arlen," she said, holding his gaze. "Not as a soldier. Not as a mercenary. As a protector. If I am to survive what comes next, I cannot do it alone." She pressed the crystal to his palm. A sharp sting pulsed through his skin, followed by warmth, then light. The runes flared, and for an instant he felt everything. Her heartbeat sinking with his, her fears, her determination, even the way she saw him. Not as a tool or a burden, but as something far more. "You are my protector now," Elira said, voice trembling. "Bound by blood and oath. Until death, or until the throne is reclaimed." Jake stared at his hand, the mark slowly fading but the warmth still lingering. "I'm not a knight, princess," he said. "I don't do oaths. I don't do this." She leaned closer, her breath brushing his lips. "You already did." The moment hung there, charged and fragile. Jake wanted to say something, anything, but the faint buzz of incoming drones snapped him back to reality. "Time to move," he said. They emerged from the wreckage as ghosts of the ruins, slipping between patrols, moving beneath cover of darkness. Jake led her through the underlayers of the city, through old utility tunnels and forgotten tech corridors. He knew they wouldn't make it far without weapons. Supplies. Allies. So he took a risk. They broke into the den of Rask Marin, a traitor, an arms dealer, and the man responsible for selling Elira's location to the Zorvax in the first place. Jake didn't kill him. He could have. He should have. Instead, he beat him. Took what they needed. Left Rask alive with a shattered jaw and the promise of retribution when the crown was restored. Elira watched from the shadows. Not once did she flinch. Back in the cold tunnel, Jake handed her a plasma blade, watching her fingers wrap around it with surprising strength. "You okay?" She nodded. "They want a traitor. Let's give them a revolution." Jake grinned. "You're starting to sound like me." She didn't smile. Instead, she stepped close, the crystal between them still faintly glowing. "No," she said. "I'm starting to sound like us." For the first time since Zalvin 4 burned, there was stillness. Jake and Elira had found refuge in a long-abandoned observatory nestled in the jagged cliffs of a forgotten moon orbiting the gas giant Varellos. The stars here shone brighter. No searchlights, no sirens, no patrols. Just quiet, raw and unfamiliar. Elira stood by the shattered window, bathed in pale silver light. The wind whispered through the broken dome, catching strands of her hair and casting them in soft motion. She was barefoot, her injuries healing faster now that their resonance link had deepened. She no longer trembled. Her skin glowed again. Jake leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching her. "You've been staring at that sky for hours," he said. She didn't turn. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to live without purpose? Without pressure?" Jake gave a short laugh. "All the time. That's why I ran." She turned to him then, expression unreadable. "What were you running from?" Jake looked away. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." He hesitated, then sat down on the edge of an old console and let the words come, slower than usual. "I was a soldier. Earth's private sector wars. We were sent in to clean up corporate messes and called it peacekeeping. I lost my entire unit on Dravos Prime. Friendly fire from our own side, because pulling out was cheaper than finishing the mission." Elira stepped closer. "I buried them myself," he said. "After that, I didn't go back. Started smuggling. Running from one system to the next. No more banners. No more orders. Just me." She was in front of him now, looking into his eyes. "But you stopped running the moment you saw me." Jake nodded. "Yeah, and I don't know why." Her hand reached out, fingers brushing his jaw, tentative at first, then steady. "I think I do." They stood like that in silence, the air between them thick with things neither of them could say without setting fire to the fragile balance they'd found. Then she leaned in, so close her breath kissed his lips. "Say something," she whispered. Jake swallowed. "If I kiss you, this won't be survival anymore." Elira's voice was barely audible. "I don't want it to be." She pressed her mouth to his, soft, searching, then fierce. He lifted her effortlessly, and she wrapped around him like she belonged there. They sank to the floor in a tangle of warmth and want, the cold stone beneath them forgotten. Her fingers tangled in his hair, his lips trailed the edge of her jaw. The bioluminescence of her skin flared and pulsed, dancing with every heartbeat they shared. They didn't speak. They just breathed. Afterward, she lay beside him, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. "You know this can't last," she said. Jake stared at the stars above through the cracked glass ceiling. "I know. They'll come. And we'll fight." He nodded. "And we'll win." She tilted her head up. "You sound so sure." Jake turned to meet her eyes. "Because I've never had something worth fighting for before." A soft smile curved her lips. "I'm not a prize, Jake." He leaned in and kissed her forehead. "No. You're a reason." The stars continued to shine. For now they had a moment. A breath of peace in the eye of the storm. And tomorrow they'd be ready for war. Dawn didn't exist on the jagged moon. But the flicker of rising engines in the distance cast a false sunrise across the fractured horizon. Jake stood at the edge of the observatory's shattered balcony, looking down at the approaching storm. Gunships, drop carriers, a full Zorvax deployment. "They found us," he said quietly. Elira joined him, armored now in what remained of her ceremonial battle suit. Polished plates of iridescent crystal interwoven with metallic threads shimmered around her form, regal and defiant. She carried herself not just as a survivor, but as a queen in exile preparing for war. "I counted 6 destroyer-class vessels," she said. "They'll send the ground forces in first. Soften us before claiming the wreckage." Jake looked over his shoulder at the cliff face, where a communication beacon sat powered and humming. It was old-tech, Elendari design. He'd helped her rewire it the night before using salvaged components and some barely legal power cells. If they could hold out long enough, the signal would reach the scattered remnants of her loyalists hiding across the stars. "We light it up," Jake said. "They come. And we take our world back." "Or we die here," Elira replied. Jake turned to her and reached out, adjusting a strap on her armor with surprising tenderness. Then we die loud." She smiled faintly, then looked up into his eyes, serious now. "If I fall, if they take me, I won't let them. Jake, listen to me." "No," he interrupted, voice like steel. "You don't get to talk like that. You bound me to you. By blood. By choice. That wasn't a spell. That was a promise." She exhaled, the intensity of his gaze sinking into her like gravity. She took his hand and squeezed it once. "Then let's make them regret ever coming here." Within the hour, they had fortified the observatory's lower chambers. Automated turrets salvaged from syndicate wrecks lined the outer ridge. Jake rigged proximity mines across the northern path and built a fallback route toward the beacon tower. Elira programmed a last-ditch overload into the beacon's power core, a final strike in case they were overwhelmed. The first wave hit just after the 6th hour. Zorvak's shock troops dropped like black rain, their armor bristling with jagged plating, their faces hidden behind insectoid helmets. They came in silence, until the first explosion lit the air. Jake opened fire with a high-velocity rail carbine, tearing through the front line with brutal precision. Elira was a force beside him, wielding her plasma blade with elegance and fury. Every swing carved arcs of molten air, her movements a deadly dance of ancient combat and primal rage. They fought back to back, moving as one. He covered her blind spots. She struck at his flanks. And when the enemy tried to separate them, they cut down twice as many in retaliation. Blood stained the ground, black, red, silver. Smoke filled their lungs. Bodies piled. By the third wave, Jake had taken a graze to the side, his armor scorched. Elira limped from a blast that had torn through the floor behind her. They retreated into the beacon chamber. "Signals broadcasting," Jake grunted, slamming the door control behind them. "Now we just hold." Elira dropped beside him, clutching her thigh, her voice tight with pain. "How long?" "No idea." "Then let's buy them every second." The Zorvaks breached the door. The chamber became chaos. Grenades exploded, shattering crystal walls. Jake tackled an armored brute, driving a combat knife through the alien's neckplate while plasma scorched the air behind him. Elira vaulted over a terminal, slicing through another attacker mid-leap. They were outnumbered, surrounded, exhausted, but they never stopped moving, never stopped fighting. And then, the rumble. Distant at first, then closer. Thunder from above. Jake looked up through the broken ceiling. Ships. Hundreds. Royal blue hulls marked with the seal of the true Elendari. Loyalists. Survivors. Resistance forces who had seen the beacon and answered the call. The Zorvaks faltered. Their formation broke. And in that moment, Jake grabbed Elira's hand and rose beside her. "You hear that?" She looked toward the light rising from the canyon. "They came." He pulled her close, forehead resting against hers. "You're not alone anymore. Neither are you." As the sky ignited in the roar of battle and her people surged toward victory, the betrayed rose, not just as rebels, not just as survivors, but as a new force bound by love, loss, and fire. They would not be forgotten. They would not be silenced. And they were not done yet. The battle raged into the night, lighting up the sky like a storm of fire and vengeance. The Elendari resistance swept down from orbit in formation, wings of sleek starfighters cutting through the air. The Loyalists had come from every sector. Pilots, warriors, even defected nobles who had waited too long to rise. The tide had turned. Jake stood with Elira at the highest point of the observatory tower, the remains of the beacon humming softly beside them. The final Zorvak's vessel had just been brought down in flames over the far cliffs, its wreckage smoldering like a defeated god. He turned to her. She was bruised and tired, armor scorched, hair singed from combat, but standing taller than ever. Her people had seen her fight. They had seen her bleed. And now they saw her win. Elira walked forward as the Loyalist forces landed. One by one, they knelt. The captains of the fleet. The remnants of her shattered royal guard. Even the general who once thought her too soft to rule. Jake stepped back into the shadows, watching. This was her moment. But she didn't let it pass alone. She turned, eyes locking onto his, and without hesitation, held out her hand. He hesitated, just for a second. Then he stepped forward, letting her pull him into the light. Elira's voice carried across the cliffs. "This man," she said, "was not born among us. He does not carry our blood. He wears no crest. He comes from a world far from ours. And yet, when all others abandoned me, he stayed. He protected me. He fought beside me. And he never once asked for anything in return." She looked up at him, eyes shimmering, full of unspoken emotion. "Jake Arlen is no longer my protector. That title is too small now. He is my equal, my partner. And if I may be so bold—" She stepped closer, gently touching his chest, over the place where her light had once pulsed through him. "My choice." The crowd was silent for a heartbeat. Then came the roar. Cheers rose from every direction, voices unified in celebration. Weapons lifted into the sky. The Elendari anthem surged from deep within their ships, echoing across the moon's surface. Jake leaned close to her, grinning despite the exhaustion. "Your people really go big, huh?" She smiled, resting her forehead against his. "You'll get used to it." The days that followed moved quickly. The Zorvac syndicate collapsed in the wake of their defeat. The traitorous council members were tried and exiled. Elira ascended the throne, not in opulence, but in resilience. She restored the council with loyal leaders from across the system, many of them once rebels or soldiers who'd fought for nothing more than survival. And Jake? He stayed. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because for the first time he had a place where he wanted to be. He helped rebuild, trained the new Royal Guard, led missions to liberate outposts still held by Zorvac's remnants. And every night he returned to the palace, where Elira waited with a tired smile and warm embrace. They slept together not out of need, but comfort, trust, a bond forged in war and sealed by something far deeper. One evening, on the terrace overlooking the reborn capital, Elira took his hand as they watched the twin suns set over the new crystal spires. "What do you see out there?" she asked. Jake thought for a long time before answering. "Home," he said. She leaned against him, her voice soft and sure. "Then stay with me. Not as protector, not as soldier, but as the man who saved my life and stole my heart." Jake pulled her close and kissed her with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally stopped running. "I'm not going anywhere." And as the stars came out, no longer watched by fire or fear, two hearts beat in sync, one human, one Elendari, bound not by duty or war, but by a love that had survived everything. And now it would grow. Together. Forever.